I now have the distinct pleasure of introducing today's keynote speaker. Last October, the Honorable Bill Morneau was elected as Member of Parliament for Toronto Centre and was appointed soon after by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau as Canada's 48th Minister of Finance, with a mandate to grow the Canadian economy and deliver meaningful change for the middle class. Before entering public service, Minister Morneau had a successful career in the private sector, developing wide recognition for his economic expertise and his business acumen. He served as Chief Executive of Morneau Chappell, Canada's largest human resources services firm, working with public and private sector organizations to provide millions of Canadians with greater financial security through pension, employee benefit, and assistance programs. Last month, Minister Morneau tabled the new Liberal government's first budget, outlining an ambitious and impressive program to support the growth of the middle class, enhance long-term investment in infrastructure, and develop a greener economy. The budget also included a strong commitment to financial literacy. For our part, Visa's efforts to advance financial literacy in Canada have been a cornerstone of our decades-long global initiative. From providing educators, students, families, our free choices and decisions classroom curriculum for 20 years, to distribution of the innovative games and mobile apps I mentioned, to our pride in being recognized as an early official supporter of the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada's financial literacy strategy. Our work in Canada has become a model for success for our work in other nations. We applaud Minister Morneau's recognition of financial literacy as a critical national priority, and we look forward to his leadership in this area. And, as if tabling the government's first budget was not enough, in the last few weeks, Minister Morneau has announced a new national innovation agenda to spur economic growth and boost innovation through investments in education and new public-private partnerships. It is a true privilege to invite Canada's Finance Minister, Bill Morneau, to the stage. Please join me in giving him a warm welcome.
Thank you very much. Well, I'd like to start by thanking Nat for that very warm introduction. As someone who has 4 teenagers, I'll tell you, Nat, 2 of them are old enough now that they're not, I don't think, playing as many video games as they used to, and not reading quite as many comic books as they used to. I'm in the perpetual challenge of trying to make sure that my 14-year-old actually isn't playing video games as often as he seems to want to do, and isn't reading comic books all day long. So he's actually reading books. So I know now as a father what's going to happen in the course of the next few months. He's going to tell me that, well, Dad, the reason I'm playing these video games is because they're educational video games. And the reason I'm reading about the superheroes is because I'm learning about financial literacy. So I'm sure it won't be true, by the way, in my son's case, but at least you've changed the dynamic of our family over the course of the next little while. So I want to thank all of you for joining me here this morning, and obviously thank you for that very nice introduction. It's an enormous privilege for me to be here. This is my first official visit to Chicago as Canada's Finance Minister, and it's of course a great opportunity for me to open the 10th Annual Financial Literacy Summit. As Nat mentioned, I'm a relatively new Finance Minister. I'm also a relatively new politician. So I wanted to start by saying that not very long ago, I would have been in one of your seats in this audience. And I mean that quite literally, because as Nat mentioned, dealing with financial literacy issues has been a really important part of my life's work. In building Canada's largest human resources firm, I also built Canada's largest pension administrator. And so for those of you engaged in financial literacy, you'll know that administering pensions is all about trying to get information to people. So that's what I've been doing. I've been bringing information to employees on their financial situation and on their retirement possibilities. That was my job. I even did it here in Chicago, for those of you who are here locally. I started an office here more than 20 years ago, and as I mentioned to my team, I even had an apartment not that far from here in Lincoln Park on Surf Street, just a little bit north of here. So that's an important part of my history. It's something I bring to the table. One of the clients that we worked with was actually the city of Chicago. We We helped their employees to understand their healthcare choices, which, as we know in the United States, is just a little bit complicated. It's a little bit easier in Canada with one national healthcare system. You just need to choose actually where to go as opposed to how to pay and what your copay is and what your deductible is and whatever else you might need to do. So in a very personal way, it's great to be here. And from my perspective, if I can be part of a discussion on financial literacy, both here in Canada and hopefully move this agenda, I'm delighted to do that. And I guess my context is I know how difficult this issue is and how important it is to people really in all economies. I know that getting information to people to make appropriate personal decisions requires effective communication techniques and investments in technology. So for me, that's a perspective I bring to my new role that's a little different, I think, than most new politicians might bring to their role. Now, as you know, Chicago's not too far from home for most Canadians, but as Nat alluded to, I've logged many flight miles to get to be with you here today. My journey started although it started a little earlier in terms of the political journey, the real journey started on this new function on March 22nd. That's when I tabled our government's new and first budget. After winning the federal election, that was just 5 months later. It's really a first important step for us. It's an important step. It's an important budget because it's very proud for us to bring forward our agenda, which shows Canadians that we're putting people first in our country. I know that as you think about financial literacy, it really comes down to the individual, and I know that people in this room will understand that that's a very important starting point. I've had the real privilege to travel to many regions of my own country, and I'm continuing to do so, but also to travel internationally to tell a bit about Canada's story. I've been in New York, London, Paris, and this past weekend in Washington for G20 and IMF meetings with G20 colleagues. I've stood in front of audiences like this one, speaking at length about our commitment in Canada to the middle class and our plan for strong and inclusive growth, helping those in the middle and also those who want to get there. Today I want to present some of the major features of our agenda through the lens of financial literacy and the rapid and innovative change underway in the financial sector, which is impacting citizens in our country and I know here as well. We know that financial literacy and financial well-being go hand in hand. At the heart of our plan is thinking about how people do. It's about giving every Canadian a real and fair chance to succeed. Nous croyons que toutes les Canadiennes et tous les Canadiens méritent des chances réelles et égales de réussite. I won't speak that much more in French for you. But it's one of those things when you're Canadian, you speak a few words in French. We believe, as we've said many times, that when you have an economy that works for the middle class, you really have a country that works for everyone because people are working together. So we started by putting more money directly in people's pockets through tax breaks and changing the way we deliver child benefits in our country. Our budget takes advantage of what we see as our fiscal space to make historic investments in infrastructure over the next decade. It takes steps, as Nat mentioned, towards a more innovative economy. And crucially, it provides help so that the most vulnerable members of our society, those people who are working hard to actually get into the middle class, benefit from the economic growth that we'll create together. But for us, in order to create the kind of truly inclusive growth that we aspire to, we need to ensure that families have the knowledge and the tools to really participate fully in our economy. So that's why it's so important for me to be here today, and that's where, as you know, financial literacy and education come in. That's why people here in this room can make such an enormous difference. So for us, we know that the bottom line is that if we want our citizens to make smart financial decisions, whether it's when they're buying a home or paying for their kids' education, or, as I know, in saving for their retirement, then we have to take on the obligation to make sure that two critical conditions exist for them. First, we need to make sure that the broader economy supports those goals. That's a starting point. Second, we need to make sure that people, and by people I mean families, I mean consumers, are really empowered to take the full advantage of that growth for themselves and their families. We know that having financially literate citizens making smart choices, ultimately what that's going to do, it's going to support a stronger economy in which people are able to plan and save throughout their lives so that they can really realize the potential of all their hard work during the course of their working lives. But we know that the relationship between economic well-being and a financially literate population, as you know in this room, is not a static one. We need to make sure along the way that consumers are well served. So in our country, the Government of Canada plays an active role promoting and advancing financial literacy, and we do that through the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada. And I'm pleased that Lucy Tedesco, who's the Commissioner of the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada, is here with us today. We know that this is an area of constant change that we need to keep on top of. The advent of digital currencies and peer-to-peer lending, crowdfunding, and electronic payments are changing the way that people budget and spend and save and invest. We also know that changes in organizational and government retirement plans are making the delivery of critical information even more important, and as we know, even more challenging. What I've seen in my career is that dynamic modeling tools are necessary, and these spur a need for efforts in financial literacy and education to keep up with that challenge. We need to make sure that consumers continue to be empowered to make the kind of choices they need to make. And we know that this is especially true and particularly difficult for those who may not have access to emerging technologies, or those who need tailored information and products that are specifically targeted to meet their needs. So for us, we know that we need to specifically highlight some particular groups of citizens that are challenged in this regard. Our most impoverished citizens, clearly, our youth, who we need to help to understand their financial choices, and our seniors, who need to make choices with their more limited resources. These are populations that are particularly vulnerable in the area of financial education. We know that technology, while critically important, it can also challenge us because we need to be creative in meeting these needs, using technology where we can use technology. But we want to be sure that as technology changes the landscape, that no single group is unintentionally left behind in our society. So for us, in our budget 2016, we announced our intention to modernize our financial consumer protection framework for banking by clarifying and enhancing consumer protection rules and ultimately making it more responsive to Canadians' changing needs in our country. We also made significant commitments to improving the government delivery of information to citizens in our budget. We know that better government IT systems are a basic building block for the delivery of information to Canadians on our social programs, the starting point for people's understanding of their financial situation. But we also know that financial well-being isn't limited to the choices that people make. Governments have an important role to play in making sure the financial sector remains resilient and stable. That's why our budget highlighted our intention to undertake a review of financial sector legislation in our country. So this review is going to be a good occasion to speak to individuals across our country, as well as industry leaders and experts, to hear their thoughts on how best to strengthen our regulatory framework so that our sector remains among the world's soundest. This is a very important undertaking when we consider how our plan achieves the larger objective of economic well-being, particularly for the middle class in our country. To that end, our plan makes strategic, targeted investments in areas that can grow our economy over the long term. We also treat diversity, clean technology, business growth, and innovation as key factors in economic success. We're confident that we've got it right because one of the many things that we've done since taking office, among the many things, the most important thing that we've done is we've gone out to listen to people in our country and listen to people abroad. We know that listening is one of the most important things in any activity around leadership. And when we heard what people were saying, we were touched to experience over and over again the commitment that Canadians feel towards their communities and the hopes and the aspirations that they reserve for their children, for the next generation. So that's why our plan to deliver benefits for families with children makes more of a difference for families than any other social program in our country since the introduction of our universal health care system. Through the way we've taken a look at delivering child benefits, what we call the Canada Child Benefit, we're going to give in our country 9 out of 10 families with children more money for things they need in their life. Everything from paying the rent, buying new clothes for their kids to get back to school, or even healthier food. For those families who are receiving these benefits, they'll get an average of $2,300 more annually in their family budgets. So we know that by targeting our actions to those families who need it most, we not only strengthen Canada's middle class, but we're also going to lift hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty in our country. So we know that that's the building block. That means greater financial stability for thousands of families. We've provided the basis for a better family life, and we know that now if citizens make the right choices on how to help their family, that's going to be critically important for them. We've built the building block, and financial literacy takes off from there. We've also heard during the time we've been out and listening that organizations like the International Monetary Fund, the OECD, and some G20 members, they've urged countries like ours to use available fiscal capacity to make targeted investments that can boost our economy both now and in the future. So we listened to Canadians and we listened to those international interveners. And then we took the very best of what we heard and we transformed those many voices into our plan for action for our country. So now to my time out and talking to Canadians, I can say that I'm not surprised that Canadians have responded with such enthusiasm to our plan. And I can also say in going abroad that I'm not surprised that the international community is holding us up as an example to follow. For Canadians, we know this was the plan that they wanted when they elected a new government. It's the plan that they told us that they needed to make a difference in their families. From Wall Street to the IMF to the OECD and the G20, what we can see is that people out there know that we're onto something. And some people are telling us. So the Financial Times calls Canada and I'm quoting, a glimmer of light for our wise use of fiscal policy to invest in our economy. In their case, they say a clear sign of our understanding of what we need to do to improve our economic situation. Even the Wall Street Journal called us the poster child for the IMF's global growth strategy. So when you have the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal, that's not bad. But we also had Christine Lagarde, the managing director of the International Monetary Fund, praising Canada based on our new approach. She's saying that we're using the fiscal capacity we have wisely to make a real difference in the long-term growth in our country. So if financial literacy means making the right financial choices to achieve a given goal, then I guess what I want to say is that Canada as a country has become a very good student. Like anyone else facing complicated financial decisions, our government's collected the best information. We've taken the time to listen, to consider the issues, to review what we should do, and we've articulated our goal of inclusive growth, and our goal of preparing Canada for success in the 21st century. And now we've started to use the tools at our disposal to achieve exactly those goals. Now, I will say, obviously, fiscal policy for country is vastly more complicated than choosing the right credit card or mortgage, I think. Not always. But setting a goal and budgeting wisely to achieve it, whether it's buying your first home or paying off student loans, are precisely the kinds of skills that financial literacy education aims to instill. Managing money and debt wisely, planning and saving for the future, and preventing and protecting people against fraud or financial abuse. They're not just core principles of a successful financial literacy curriculum. They're also the necessary conditions for us as we work to achieve our vision, to help people to be successful. We're ready in Canada to lead by example, to show Canadians and the world that it's possible to grow the economy while putting the middle class first. We're trying to take a fundamentally new approach to fiscal policy that reflects our capacity, but most especially our willingness to act on behalf of Canadians of today and tomorrow. We want to identify areas like infrastructure and innovation where our investments have the greatest potential to help middle-class families while providing and preparing us for strong economic returns over the long term in our country. And the way I like to think about it, it's like a tide that raises all boats. And we know that benefits will be shared across our population if we're successful in doing this. For us, as we think about those key building blocks, innovation is a critical part of our plan and our vision for the future. We know that we're on the threshold of a new era where traditional industries need to adjust to the rapid pace of change and where new technologies are transforming the global economy. It's clear that people, companies, and countries who create the next economy are going to prosper. And for us, our government is ready to do its part in moving forward on that agenda. We want to be on the leading edge of the changes happening in the global economy, not just because it's good for tomorrow, but also because it's going to be good for Canadians today. So in the next year, we'll define a bold new innovation agenda that will position Canada as a center of global innovation. We know that we need fresher, broader, and more collaborative efforts to embrace the innovation opportunities, so many of those opportunities that you see too here in this room, that change can bring. For us, we know that working together is really the Canadian way. Public sectors need to work together with the private sector to create the conditions for economic success. And whether that's an innovative new fintech application that helps young people to save for their education, or a comic book, I guess, Nat, or a scientific breakthrough with the potential to help people in Canada and around the world, for us, this is the power of collaboration. I'm confident that this approach will bring about economic growth now and in the years to come. And crucially, really crucially, it's going to allow more people to benefit from the growth that we're engineering for our economy. So I want to conclude by emphasizing something that I said at the very beginning of this talk this morning. Our new government believes that we all deserve a real and fair chance at success. So I want to thank people in this room because the role you play in helping consumers, in helping families, you're helping people to achieve the goals that they can have for their families by making informed financial decisions that can make a real difference for them today and, importantly, for tomorrow. So whether you're an innovator or an educator or part of the financial sector, we know that we all have an opportunity to contribute to shared success in positive ways. We know that financial literacy is an essential building block of building a stronger economy and of providing the possibility for inclusive growth, where no single group in our society gets left behind. Our goal, the goal of improving potential outcomes for citizens, it's an important role for government, we know that, but our efforts will only be successful if people are capable of deciding the best way for them and their families to succeed. And we know that financial literacy is critical in these efforts. So truly, you're central in our collective future prosperity. Our vision of the future is we think, bold and ambitious, and we're prepared as a government to take new and necessary steps to achieve it. So we're taking that bold action so that our children may inherit a more prosperous and a more hopeful Canada. And so for me, I want to say today that I'm thankful to have all of your support in helping us to achieve these very important goals. Thank you very much. I think also we're going to take a few questions. Is that
That's correct, Mr. Minister. Thank you so much for taking some time to for some questions. Is there anyone that has a question? We will just take by hand.
Great. Thank you very much, Minister, for your comments. I just have a question. In your speech, you mentioned an approach to inclusive growth, ensuring that no one gets left behind in the economic growth that you plan on generating. In fact, you singled out youth and seniors as groups that are particularly vulnerable. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about your efforts to bring financial literacy to those groups.
Thank you. The way we're starting in our efforts to make a real difference is to think about the building blocks of how we can make real change. So critically for us, the first building block is making sure that there's actually the possibility for success. So in terms of those two specific cohorts, youth and the elderly, in terms of youth, we started by saying we need to make sure our education is accessible to youth. So we've put in place the possibility for people to increase the student loans, the student grants they can get. We've increased it by 50% to ensure that students have the capability of actually getting an education. And that means students from all walks of life, those from lower and middle class in particular who might not be able to afford the education otherwise. So that's an important building block. With respect to seniors, we increased what in Canada is called the guaranteed income supplement for single seniors. We found that single seniors are 3 times more likely to live in poverty than other seniors, and so we increased the amount that they're eligible for by a significant margin, by 10%, which takes literally hundreds of thousands of single seniors moves them up above what we call the LICO, the low income cutoff line, which is the poverty level. So as a starting point, you actually need to do something where the possibility is there. And then from there, we know we need to be able to get information to people so they understand their situation. So in the case of youth, we're starting this year a review, a youth strategy review to make sure that we understand how youth actually needs to deal with getting student information, how they deal with getting information on summer job opportunities, and how they think about getting future employment opportunities. So we are working towards an agenda that can help youth, and part of that will be thinking about how they get information. With respect to the broader government, we are, as I mentioned, we're working on actually our IT systems, which, as you can imagine in government, they're all over the place. You know, you have many different departments with many different government systems, so we're trying to look at how we can knit those systems together, which we recognize in getting in people information so they can understand their options. If you don't have a core operating system, it's very difficult to do. So I would say the first step is making sure that we have the ability to actually help those groups of people, and the second step is to make sure that we think about how best they can be helped in the future through getting better information.
Good morning, Minister. Thank you for coming to our summit. I actually work for Visa, managing the financial literacy program in Latin America. And we have found in many of our countries that along with the growth and the opportunity that the middle class has in our countries comes critical pain points, like, for instance, developing bad financial habits and then incurring in overdebt, for instance. How do you see, or how would you address this type of critical pain points that may get developed also in a country like Canada?
Sorry, can you identify what the critical pain points are for me again?
Something like overdebt, like having access to financial services and developing uncontrolled bad habits by using these services without being properly informed or properly prepared.
First of all, I'm certainly not an expert on the challenges going on in Latin American countries around getting access to, or maybe too much access to debt capacity. So I don't know that I have specific policy prescriptions for that particular challenge. In Canada, we do have some particular issues in this regard. We have some housing issues that are popping up in our country where people are pushing up housing prices, in particular in a couple of cities, in Toronto and Vancouver, rapidly, that's creating some potential pockets of risk. So we're trying to use our tools that we have as a government to reduce the likelihood that people will overextend themselves in the purchase of new homes. The ways we're doing it in those particular instances is people in Canada are required to get mortgage insurance up to a certain threshold dollar investment in a home, up to $1 million. And we've increased for anybody, so our power is, since they have to get a mortgage insurance, we can make it conditional on them doing certain things. So we've said in order to get that mortgage insurance, we are going to increase the amount of deposit they need to make on their home. And in particular, we increased it for the $500,000 to $1 million amount so that we could dampen the demand in that area. So that's an important way for us of helping people to reconsider the decision they might be making that might put them in a financially difficult situation. We're also dealing at the pricing of the mortgage, which we, as a government, we enable the guarantees of those mortgages for our financial institutions. And by rethinking the pricing of those mortgage guarantees, we might impact the flexibility of the market. So we're doing that as well. So that said, consumer debt in our country is something that we need to pay attention to, because we've seen over the course of the time since the recession in 2008 that consumer debt has increased. So I will say that's something we pay close attention to, and remain focused on ensuring Canadians are prudent in their decisions. So that will be a continuing area of focus and something that we watch carefully.
Mr. Minister, I think we have time for one more question over here.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. My name is James Stewart from First Financial Security. And as we discuss here about financial literacy is the basics for all investments and financial literacy, are you guys developing programs teaching it in the schools to make it a curriculum that from pre-K up, that they develop the financial literacy there?
Well, I would say that in our country, the educational system is delivered through the provinces. The kindergarten to grade 12 system is delivered through the provinces, which means that the federal jurisdiction does not have control over this area of curriculum development. So I think that presents, as you can imagine, one of the key challenges that we have in this regard in so many countries, where the decisions on curriculum are fractured and not always in the place that you can have the most impact. So I think that comes back to a response that the private sector has a critically important role to play in delivering a financial literacy. And what I would encourage is a continuing attempt to work together with the private sector and the public sector around advocacy efforts. In our country, one organization we have is something called the Learning Partnership, which is an organization that links together the private sector and public education in order to think about ways that we can improve the delivery of education to young people. And the Learning Partnership in our context is therefore taking views of the financial sector, and the people at the table, at the board table, for example, are both educators and key executives. So they're taking those views and moving them to the public educators, and the public educators are then moving out to train the trainers in a sense. So they're taking programs that the financial sector is presenting and moving them out to principals and to teachers across the country, as well as advocating more broadly for things that are going to make a difference. So not only around financial literacy, but around entrepreneurship and helping young people in particular to have a better understanding of just how commerce works. So I say all this to say I think it will have to be a collective effort. We'll be an advocate federally. We will be continuing to look at our macroprudential tools that we can use to ensure the system's working well. We'll have a bully pulpit to talk about the need for prudent decisions. And then together with the private sector, the public sector, and other levels, we'll have to work together in thinking about how we can make enhancements to curriculum to make a real difference. So,
Thank you, Mr. Minister, for your time and your remarks. We look forward to working.
I want to thank you again. It's a real pleasure to be here. And the other thing I do as a Minister of Finance is, of course, I'm an advocate for our country. So, in case you don't know, it's our 150th anniversary next year in Canada, 2017, and we're making all Canadian parks free of entry fees next year. So, as you're thinking about your vacation plans for 2017, come to Canada. Thank you.